There are a lot of things from my childhood that still stick to me to this day, but there's one that I never really talk about a lot on this channel, and that's Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas the Tank Engine was one of the biggest staples of my childhood. From all the characters, to all the stories, to its beautiful real-life scenery, to its insane crashes, this show has stuck with me for the longest time. I've been a fan of Thomas and Friends since who knows how long. I have the entire original Railway series published by Wilbert Audrey, the creator of Thomas. I've watched multiple fan-made videos from other Thomas fans on YouTube, including Victor Tanzig, Trampy, and the Unlucky Tug. I have a whole take-and-play collection of the Thomas toys, which I used to remake one of the movies from the actual show. Heck, my parents took me to Day Out with Thomas when I was a little kid. If that doesn't tell you how long I've been following Thomas, I don't know what will. Thomas is just really special to me, and there's a lot of episodes that I keep coming back to all these years later. And for this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my all-time favorites. Specifically the ones from the first 5 seasons or so, the classic era of Thomas, the era that fans remember the most fondly. And for good reasons, because seasons 1 through 5, and even 6 and 7 gave us a lot of unforgettable episodes. Some are simple and charming, some are dark and action-packed, and some are just plain fun. So with all that said, here's my top 15 Thomas and Friends model episodes. Let's get started.
I'm gonna go, there's no stopping me.
The jet engine gets a spot on this list because it's simply a fun ride. Literally. In this episode, Thomas is sent to collect the jet engine from the docks. No sooner does he get coupled up, Cranky the Crane accidentally starts the jet engine, which rockets Thomas out of the docks and across the island and back. This is admittedly a very unrealistic episode. I mean, why would you have a switch to turn on the engine just open and exposed like that? But that's what makes it so fun for me. The entire episode is just Thomas flying at full speed, passing everyone he races by. It's just a super fun episode. I also think this is the best episode with Michael Angelis' narration. It genuinely sounds like he's having a blast.
"Oh!" said Thomas. The driver tried to put on the brakes, but Thomas couldn't stop. "Oh, boy!"
I don't have much to say about this episode. It's not a great one, but it's fun. And sometimes that's all you need. And fun is what this episode gives you.
He's full of surprises, just like he'll always be.
Pop Goes the Diesel is a very funny episode. This episode introduces Diesel, who is brought to help out on Sodor. Duck, the Great Western Engine, is tasked with showing him around, and almost immediately the pair does not get along. This prompts Duck to pull a trick on Diesel, who makes a fool of himself when trying to pull some trucks out of the yard and their brakes remain on. In response to Diesel's recklessness, the trucks sing a song about him.
Trucks are waiting in the yard, packing them with diesel. Show the world what I can do, gaily boasts the Diesel. In and out he creeps about like a big black weasel. When he pulls the wrong trucks out, pop goes the Diesel.
One of the reasons I like this episode is the troublesome trucks. They're not in the episode a whole lot, but the screen time they do get, they really make an impact. The giggling, the laughing, their naughty attitudes, their song at the end, I always found them super funny as a kid. Another thing I like about this episode is Duck and Diesel, and I love how neither of them are in the right. Duck is basically the reason Diesel is a jerk, and Diesel kind of shows some of his untrustworthy behavior towards him. So on one hand, Duck isn't totally to blame for not liking Diesel from the start, but on the other, he does take things a little too unfairly. And also, the sounds the narrators make in this episode are funny too. Whatever dub you watch this episode in, be it either from George Carlin or Ringo Starr, they both make this episode all the more entertaining.
Oh! 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 They screamed. We can't! We won't!
Oh! They screamed, we can't, we won't.
Pretty good episode overall.
What the heck? Am I shattered?
A Close Shave gets a spot on this list because it's a runaway episode. Obviously, being a show about talking trains, runaways were very common. Whenever trains break away, the situation soon becomes dire, and here it is no different. This episode takes place while Duck is helping Edward on his branch line after Diesel frames him for causing trouble in the yard. Somehow, a freight train breaks away and becomes a runaway on the same line Duck is on. Up to this point being the second season of the show, this was the most serious a runaway train was taken. When the trucks come flying down the track and chase Duck, it really feels like a life or death situation. It's all up to Duck to try to stop the train before things turn into a much bigger problem. The crazy editing, the music, and the narration help set the tone for how urgent the situation is. Obviously, Duck doesn't succeed in slowing the train down and he crashes straight into a barbershop. There's some humor thrown in when it shows Duck inside the shop where the barber gets angry at him and puts shaving cream on his face. That was always super funny to me. Overall, this is a great episode that does not let up with its suspense, while at the same time isn't afraid to throw in a joke. You feel the tension and urgency once the runaway starts, and then get a bit of a laugh once things calm down. Another good episode that ends on a pretty wholesome note.
A few days later, when he came home, there was a really rousing welcome for Duck, the Great Western Engine.
His driver drove him forward. No, stop!
Busy Going Backwards is another runaway episode. In this one, Toad the brake van is tired of always going backwards behind trains and wants to go forwards for a change. That chance comes along when the trucks uncouple themselves from Oliver's train, and everything results in yet another exciting runaway. Just like a close shave, this runaway is taken both seriously and humorously. On one hand, it's suspenseful watching Toad fly across the tracks with the trucks behind him, but at the same time, it's a very fun ride, like the jet engine. I love the whole chase, I love the William Tell music mixed in with the original Thomas runaway music. I love all the things Toad almost runs into and does crash into. I love the narration from Alec Baldwin, who does a great job making the sequence very exciting. And it all ends pretty ironically, with Toad falling into a muddy pool and Oliver puffing over to him and saying,
A pond is the only place for a toad, I suppose.
overall, another fun entry on this list that still stands as one of my favorites.
You're old.
Okay, this is a bit of a tie since this is a two-part episode, and you really need to watch them both to understand the full story. In both of these episodes, Thomas tells the story of an old narrow-gauge railway that was unfortunately closed down. The other two engines, Stewart and Falcon, were sent to Sodor, but Duke gets locked up in a shed and is buried alive over time. What I love about Grandpop is that it isn't afraid to present something to its audience that seems sad or messed up. In this episode, there's two instances of that. One, in which we see an engine get his wheels removed and become permanently a generator, forever stuck in this one place and never moving. And then later when Duke is hidden away and locked up in a shed and over time is buried under the shrubs and waterways in the mountains. To the casual viewer, this is a pretty sad scene, but that's what makes it so great. And this is something the show would later play with moving forward. But don't worry, in the next episode, Sleeping Beauty, the story comes to a nice conclusion where Duke is found after a long search and rescue for him. I love these two episodes simply because they add a lot more to the Thomas universe. Everything that has to do with the old railway and the engines that used to run in it is very interesting stuff. When it came to building out the world, the show never failed at doing that. I also love how it's still able to be funny. Like, Thomas cuts the story short in the first episode and then continues it in the next episode despite who knows how much time has passed. What's even more hilarious is that Duck is the one who requested the story have a happy ending, and he didn't even get to hear it. What's even more hilarious is that in the second episode where the story continues, this is James's first time hearing about it. He wasn't even in the first episode where the story starts, so he's basically listening to the second half of it without knowing anything about the first half. Thomas, you cheeky devil. But yeah, these two episodes are great, and I highly recommend you watch them both.
Somewhere beyond the sea.
All at Sea is focused on one of the show's most popular characters with a strong moral. Duck dreams of wanting to see the horizon someday, either traveling along the waters or flying out into the sky. But throughout the episode, he learns to come to terms with the fact that he's a steam engine and he can't leave his rails. In the end, he realizes how much strength an engine like him has. He accepts his limits and where he currently stands, with his friends, where he can continue to dream of what lies beyond his reach, rather than actually experiencing it. What I love about this episode is how it uses Duck. Most of the time, he's usually very much a smartass that does things by the book.
There are two ways of doing things, Oliver. The Great Western Way and the wrong way. I know.
But this episode shows he's much more than that. He has dreams. He has interests beyond his capability, just like any other engine. This is especially a great episode because of its message. It's a pretty mature one, especially for a kid's show, about accepting that sometimes your limits can affect what you want to do. But the way they present it throughout the episode really makes it stand out. Absolutely one of the best episodes of the show, and most definitely a well-beloved one. Edward's exploit is about, well, Edward, one of the oldest engines on Sodor, and the first ever character created by Wilbur Audrey. This is another one that sticks out with fans of the show, because it's a story about one of the oldest engines, no matter what all the naysayers say of him, pushing through every obstacle that comes his way no matter how drastic the situation. Edward is taking his passenger train back to the station when he gets stuck in a pickle, where a huge storm picks up and damages him en route, completely destroying one of his axles in the process. Against all odds, Edward manages to bravely push through the storm with every ounce of steam he has left, and gets his train home with only a single working axle. Edward is such a fantastic character. Not every episode he stars in is a banger, but the ones that are the ones that are really special. They show that despite being an old geezer at this point, and despite all the engines who believe he's past his prime, Edward is still capable of giving his all even in the worst situations. A fantastic episode, even if the way the book presents the conflict is a little better.
A waterfall! Waterfall!
Season 5 is my favorite of the classic Thomas seasons. It was the experimental season, the one that played with tone the best, with stories that could either be simple and charming or dark and action-packed. And Toby and the Flood is one of many examples of that from this season. The plot is that a big storm falls upon the island that lasts for several weeks. The lakes overflood, an old dam starts leaking and finally comes apart, and Toby, stuck on a bridge down the river, is swept away in the floodwaters. And the rest of the episode becomes a rescue to save Toby before he goes down a waterfall. I love this episode because it never lets up with its dark tone. Right out of the gate, trouble is already brewing, and things get even worse when the dam collapses and Toby floats off on his little section of track. Everything is played very over the top and suspenseful. It's an action-packed, crazy story that's played 100% straight. It's taken super seriously and never at any point does it talk down to kids. It's an episode filled with tension. The action never stops, and the music. Holy moly, the music is awesome. It's basically only a single long continuous piece that's played through the whole episode, and yet it just works. This is one of the craziest episodes of Season 5 and the show as a whole, and I highly recommend any newcomer to Thomas to watch it. It will definitely leave you on the edge of your seat.
It's creepy, kooky, mysterious, spooky.
Haunted Henry is another dark episode. It's spooky and scary, has dark lighting, and like Toby and the Flood, never feels like it's talking down to its audience. Everything about this episode scared me as a kid. All the scenes where Henry is puffing through the fog and seeing all the signs and weird lights in the distance, it's pretty freaky stuff. It all keeps you on your seat. You're engaged the whole way through, wondering what's going on. It all culminates in the end when everyone goes through all the warnings and it becomes yet another troublesome truck's runaway, where the cars are spooked and run away from the scary atmosphere only to plunge down a steep ravine. Of course, the episode has a happy ending, as it's just Old Bailey the whole time. His line is rebuilt and he becomes a part of the railway. A nice, wholesome end to what is overall a very spooky episode. It's another one of my favorites for these reasons alone, and I really love it.
We're gonna get him out of here. We're gonna help him escape.
Escape? Really?
We're all gonna escape.
Escape is about Douglas taking a train to a goods yard on the other side of the island. There he comes across a rusty engine in hiding named Oliver and his brake van Toad. Oliver had attempted to run away to Sodor to avoid being scrapped in his old railway. With quick strategy and thinking, Douglas manages to help him escape. This episode is great because it's one where real-life events play into the story. In real life, British Railways started rapidly scrapping all its steam engines in the 1960s to make way for newer, modern diesel technology. An order from the chairman of BR, Dr. Richard Beeching. Can you tell that I learned about him from Victor's channel? Left and right, steam locomotives became rusty and old, put in scrap lines, and melted down. Sodor is essentially the place for steam engines to remain unharmed from that, and Oliver had intended to escape to Sodor to be safe there. This episode plays a lot like a prison escape movie. The escape itself is played very straight, the visuals are very impressive, using a lot of dark lighting for most of the sequence, and the music makes it all the more exciting. I don't really know what else to say. I love the episode, and I especially love how it implements real-life history into the plot. Thomas was always at its best when it included real engines and real history into its stories. And this is one of those many examples. I highly recommend it.
You see that pole there? Oh, yes, fish.
Fish gets a spot on this list simply because of its presentation. From the nighttime shot to the quayside, to the above view of the tracks and trees, to the shot of the roads and cottages amidst the beautiful dark purple sky. These wonderful visuals do not cease to impress. But where the episode shines the most is how it presents the engines. Thomas has always been a show about trains, which is the whole concept of the show and where the appeal of it stemmed from. But more than any other episode, Fish shows how truly powerful they are. They're more than simple talking trains. They're literal, true metal machines. Actual steam locomotives. And you feel that across the entire episode. From the lower angles of the engines as they steam across the screen, the scenes of them puffing across the green countryside, all the convincing steam effects, all the shots of several engines facing away from the frame, every single one of these strengths tell you that these are more than funny talking trains with faces. These are real heavy metal steam locomotives, and you get that with every single frame, every single shot, every single sequence. Oh, and the crash is hilarious.
I think I might be a ghost.
Duncan Gets Spooked is a narrow gauge story and yet another spooky episode. But what puts it this high on this list is not just because of what it shows us, but also what it doesn't. In this episode, Rusty tells Duncan a story about a ghost engine. The engine was crossing a high bridge when it suddenly tumbles over the side and plunges into the dark sea below. It's never seen again. Legend has it that its ghost still haunts the bridge to this day. Duncan, of course, sees it as plain nonsense, but when he travels into the night, reaches that same high bridge, and witnesses what he thinks is the ghost train, he gets scared and runs away. This episode is effective for two reasons. One, because we see the engine's death. The episode isn't afraid to show us how this sentient steam engine falls off the bridge and drowns into the water. None of it is sugarcoated at any point. It's legit haunting. Second, this works because everything is left to the audience's imagination. We're never told if the story is real or if it actually happened. When Duncan sees what he thinks is the ghost, we're never told if it really was. When the fireflies form the engine's shape, we're never told if that was intentional or if that was the real ghost engine. None of this is told to us. The audience is allowed to interpret the story for themselves. And that's why this episode works so well. That's why it sticks in people's minds when they think about the best Thomas episodes. And Duncan Gets Spooked is most certainly another one of the absolute best episodes of the entire series.
I can't believe what I'm seeing. A giant rock. It's a rock and it's giant.
Rusty and the Bowler is Thomas and Friends' take on Indiana Jones. This is another experimental episode of Season 5 that poses the question, how much can humans meddle with nature? Sir Topham Hatt decides to build a quarry in an old abandoned part of the railway, but all of a sudden a giant boulder falls from its perch, breaks loose, and chases several of the engines, and destroys the railway, prompting Sir Topham Hatt to close construction.
We should have left this part of the island alone.
This episode is another one that is left up to the audience's imagination. Was it humans intervening that caused the boulder to go on a rampage? Or was there something supernatural about it? Was it nature's way of telling the characters to back the f*** off? Whatever the weird, creepy reason is, what we get of this episode is, like I said, Thomas's take on Indiana Jones. Everyone doubting on whether or not the boulder really is alive, the whole chase sequence with it is intense, and especially crashing into the engine shed, it once again does not let up with its dark tone. This is another fantastic episode of Season 5, and like I said, everything is left up to the audience to draw their own conclusions. Easily one of the biggest standouts of the show. And yet there's one more they already made that's just a little more perfect. The Flying Kipper is amazing. Even in the first season of the show, they delivered a true banger. When compared to the rest of Season 1, it just feels different. Most of the episodes from Season 1 are very lighthearted and simple, but what makes Flying Kipper a standout is that it decides to change things up and have this episode take place primarily during the dawn, and have most of the episode be a journey type of story. A lot of the episode's runtime is just Henry traveling with his fish train, but it's filled with breathtaking winter visuals and an iconic soundtrack that heightens the experience. This episode is especially notable for its crash scene. Everyone knows how the story goes. Henry is sent to deliver this non-stop fish train at dawn. Ice covers the points and sends Henry into a different track that sends him colliding with a goods train on his line at full speed. This was the very first full on-screen crash of the series, one that we had never seen from Thomas up until this point. It's treated with full seriousness, with some silence for the audience to take in what had just happened before it cuts to the next scene. I also love how this episode shows us humans before the crash happens. They do get out in time without suffering severe injuries, but the fact that they show humans before the collision adds a lot of realism to the scene. Everything about this episode is astounding, from its visuals, to its music, to its crash sequence. There's so many reasons why it's another one that stands out in the fandom's minds when talking about the best Thomas episodes. Easily, hands down, the best episode of Thomas and Friends. So that's my top 15 of the model era of Thomas. If for some reason you have never seen any of these episodes or know nothing about the Thomas the Tank Engine franchise, I highly recommend giving all of these episodes a watch. You can find them all in a YouTube playlist I made. The link is down below in the description. And then, if you can, find the original Railway Series collection that inspired the show, because there is a lot more stories you can find there. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next video.